The fluorescent lights of the downtown bus flickered as Maya pressed her forehead against the cool window, fighting the exhaustion that weighed down her eyelids like sandbags. 3 double shifts in 4 days. Her scrubs still smelled faintly of hospital disinfectant, and her feet throbbed with a pain so deep she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without wincing. At 24, she'd imagined her medical internship would be challenging, but nothing had prepared her for the soul-crushing fatigue of 16-hour days, spent rushing between patients, memorizing diagnoses, and surviving on vending machine coffee and determination. As the bus lurched forward into the rainy Seattle night, Maya's vision blurred. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept more than 4 hours. She couldn't remember the last time she'd called her mom. She couldn't remember why she'd thought she was strong enough for this. And then, as the bus swayed around a corner, her body finally surrendered to the exhaustion she'd been fighting, and her head fell sideways onto the shoulder of the stranger sitting beside her. Marcus Thornton had been staring at the same email on his phone for 10 minutes, without really seeing it. The words swam before his eyes: quarterly reports, board meetings, acquisition proposals, all the machinery of his life. As CEO of Thornton Medical Technologies, a company worth over $300 million. At 42, he'd built an empire from a single patent and a dream, transforming medical device technology and saving countless lives in the process. Yet tonight, riding the public bus instead of sitting in the back of his usual town car, he felt more lost than he had in years. It had been his therapist's idea. When was the last time you connected with regular people, Marcus? When was the last time you saw how the other half lives? So here he was, anonymous in jeans and a worn jacket, trying to remember what it felt like to be normal, trying to remember what it felt like to be the broke graduate student he'd once been, riding this same bus line 20 years ago, dreaming of changing the world. He felt the weight before he registered what was happening, a head resting on his shoulder. Marcus turned slightly and saw her, a young woman in rumpled scrubs, dark circles under her closed eyes, her face carrying the kind of exhaustion that went beyond mere tiredness into something closer to defeat. Her hospital ID badge hung crooked on her chest. Maya Patel, internal medicine intern, Seattle Grace Hospital. His first instinct was to shift away to wake her, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way her breathing had finally evened out, the first piece she'd probably felt all day. Maybe it was the way her fingers still clutched her phone, as if she'd been trying to stay awake until the very last second. Or maybe it was because he saw something familiar in her face, the same desperate determination he'd once worn, like armor when he was building his company from nothing, sacrificing everything, believing that sheer willpower could overcome any obstacle. So Marcus stayed still. He let this stranger sleep on his shoulder as the bus made its stops, as passengers shuffled on and off, as the rain pelted the windows and the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks. He shifted his weight carefully whenever his arm started to go numb. He angled his body to shield her from the bright overhead lights, and he waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Marcus watched her ID badge swing gently with the bus's movement, and found himself thinking about his own company, about the medical devices they produced, about the hospitals they supplied. He thought about the countless hours of board meetings and investor presentations, all those conversations about profit margins and market share. When was the last time he'd actually thought about the people who used his products? The doctors, the nurses, the interns like this young woman who worked themselves to exhaustion, trying to save lives. The bus driver's voice crackled over the speaker. End of the line, folks. Last stop! Maya jolted awake, confusion flooding her features as she realized where she was and whose shoulder she'd been sleeping on. She pulled back as if she'd been burned, her eyes wide with mortification. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry!" She pressed her hands to her face, which had flushed crimson. "I didn't mean to. I've been working doubles. And I'm so sorry." Marcus smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through his chest for the first time in months. "Don't be. You looked like you needed it. That's not an excuse for invading your personal space like that." Maya fumbled for her bag, clearly wanting to disappear. "I hope I didn't drool on you or anything horrifying." "You didn't. And honestly, you probably needed that 20-minute power nap more than I needed an unencumbered shoulder." Marcus noticed her hands, were shaking slightly as she gathered her things. Long shift? Maya laughed, but it came out more like a sob. 72 hours this week so far. 3 more shifts to go. I keep telling myself it'll be worth it. That this is what it takes to become a good doctor. But sometimes... She trailed off, then shook her head. Sorry, you don't need to hear about my problems. Actually, Marcus said quietly, I think I do. There was something in his tone that made Maya pause. She really looked at him then, taking in the tired eyes. The expensive watch that didn't quite match his casual clothes. The way he carried himself with an authority that seemed at odds with riding the public bus at 11 o'clock at night. You look like you've got your own stuff going on, she said, her natural compassion overriding her embarrassment. Marcus surprised himself by nodding. I'm trying to remember why I do what I do. I'm trying to remember what matters. They stepped off the bus together, standing under the shelter as the rain poured down around them. The bus pulled away, leaving them in a pool of fluorescent light in an otherwise dark city street. Can I buy you a coffee? Marcus asked. There's a diner around the corner that's open all night. I used to study there when I was in grad school. Maya hesitated, clearly torn between exhaustion and curiosity about this strange, kind man who'd let her sleep on his shoulder. I should get home, she said, but without much conviction. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't from a vending machine? She smiled ruefully. You've got me there. The diner was exactly as Marcus remembered it. Cracked vinyl booths, coffee that could strip paint, and a waitress, who looked like she'd been working there since the Reagan administration. They slid into a corner booth, and Marcus ordered them both the kind of greasy comfort, food that only tastes right at midnight. Over coffee and mediocre pancakes, Maya talked. She told him about growing up as the daughter of immigrants, about her parents who'd sacrificed everything to put her through school, about her little brother who looked at her like she hung the moon. She told him about the patient she'd lost last week, a grandmother who reminded her of her own nanny, and how she'd cried in the supply closet for 20 minutes before pulling herself together for the next case. She told him about her dream of opening a clinic in underserved communities, about wanting to be the doctor she'd wished she'd had growing up, when her family couldn't afford regular checkups and preventive care. And Marcus listened, really listened. Not with the distracted attention he gave to most conversations, already planning his next meeting or his next move, but with the full presence of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to connect with another human being's story. What about you? Maya asked finally, stirring her coffee. You said you were trying to remember what matters. What do you do? Marcus hesitated. He could tell her the truth, that he was the CEO of one of the companies that probably supplied the very hospital where she worked, that he had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, that he'd been profiled in Forbes and Business Insider, and had once had lunch with the president. But something made him hold back. I work in medical technology, he said carefully. I help create devices that doctors use. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot about the doctors themselves. I forgot about people like you, working those 72-hour weeks, caring so much it breaks your heart. I started seeing everything as numbers and market projections instead of human beings trying to help other human beings. Maya studied him with those sharp, tired eyes. You're more than you're letting on, aren't you? Marcus smiled. Maybe, but tonight, I'm just a guy who's grateful. He could be a comfortable shoulder for someone who needed one. They talked until 2 in the morning, until Maya's phone alarm reminded her she had to be back at the hospital in 5 hours. Marcus insisted on paying for her cab home, brushing off her protests. Thank you, Maya said as they stood outside the diner. The rain finally stopped, the city quiet around them. I don't know if you know this, but you kind of saved me tonight. I was at this place where I wasn't sure I could keep going, and somehow, talking to you, it helped me remember why I'm doing this. You saved me too, Marcus said, and meant it. More than you know. They exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch in that way people do when they've shared something meaningful, but aren't sure they'll ever see each other again. Maya's cab pulled up, and she waved as she got in, her smile the first genuine one he'd seen from her all night. Marcus stood on the empty street for a long time after she left, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone and called his assistant, not caring that it was 2 in the morning. Jennifer, I need you to do something first thing tomorrow. I want to start a fund, an endowment, for medical interns and residents at hospitals across the country. Money for housing assistance, mental health services, emergency funds. Partner with hospitals that use our equipment. I want to find every exhausted young doctor out there trying to change the world and make sure they have what they need to do it. Start with Seattle Grace. He paused, then added, and find out who's in charge of their intern program. I want to make a donation, anonymous, specifically to support their work in underserved communities. When Marcus finally got home to his empty penthouse, he didn't check his emails. Instead, he pulled out an old notebook from his graduate school days, filled with sketches and dreams about the kind of company he wanted to build. On the first page, in his younger self's handwriting, was a quote he'd long forgotten. Technology means nothing if it doesn't serve humanity. He'd spent 20 years building an empire. Maybe it was time to remember what it was for. 3 months later, Maya was reviewing her schedule when her program director called her into her office. There was a scholarship, she was told, a new initiative funding interns interested in community medicine. It would cover her housing costs and provide a stipend. She'd been selected as one of the first recipients. Maya's hands shook as she held the letter. This changed everything. This meant she could cut back her hours, could focus on her studies, could actually sleep. She could start planning for that clinic she dreamed of. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a number she'd saved but never called. "You'll never believe what just happened," she texted Marcus. The kind stranger from the bus. A miracle. In his office downtown, Marcus felt his phone buzz. He smiled as he read her message, then typed back, "Not a miracle, just kindness coming around. That's how it works." He didn't tell her the truth. He didn't tell her about the foundation he'd started, or how her story had reminded him why he'd gone into medicine technology in the first place. He didn't tell her that their conversation had sparked a complete restructuring of his company's charitable initiatives. Some gifts are meant to remain anonymous. Some moments of connection are meant to ripple outward in ways we never see. And sometimes, the simple act of being present for another person, of offering your shoulder when someone needs to rest, can change 2 lives at once. Maya would go on to open her clinic. Marcus would go on to revolutionize his company's approach to humanitarian work. But both would always remember that rainy night on the bus, when 2 strangers found exactly what they needed in each other. A reminder that kindness still exists, that exhaustion can be survived, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer another person is simply our presence, our compassion, and a comfortable shoulder when they need to rest.